I remember sitting and listening to Miss Jewel, and her main concern was her son. You see, I understand more and more that the bond between a mother and a son is so strong. She was concerned about her son because she was wondering what life would be like for him if and when God took her home. I would hear Miss Jewel lament over all things. She would lament about her baby boy. Oh, he was a grown man. Come on. But he was still her baby. Amen. Times of pain, she would not even be able sometimes to talk. She would just sometimes just say, as she thought about her son. She would lament. Lamenting is about weeping and wailing and moaning and crying. Lamenting happens many times in our lives. I know because even as we look at the book of Habakkuk, the book of Habakkuk is a book of laments. All right. It is where Habakkuk, he has a compilation of laments. This prophet, this book is very different than other prophetic books. Habakkuk is not speaking to the people on God's behalf. That's not what he's doing. Habakkuk is not, it's not an accusation against Israel for its sin against God. Habakkuk is a very different kind of book. All right. This man is crying out. He's questioning God's goodness in the midst of all that he sees. He sees injustice in the world. All right. He sees evil in the world. He experiences struggles, and he's asking, how can God still be God? Even in the midst of all of my experiences, he's concerned about God's plans to send Babylon, which was an evil nation, to judge Israel. That's right. Yeah. In the end, Habakkuk, he realizes that humanity can love God and trust God and be faithful to God, but before that realization, Habakkuk makes a list. All right. He makes a list of things that just weren't going right. Okay. Have you ever made a list of things that just weren't going right? We may not want to admit such lists. Maybe you've made mental notes of things that just weren't going right. But a list, though. Have you ever made a list? I'm not talking about a grocery list. We make many lists in life. I'm not talking about a honey-do list. I'm not talking about a bucket list or the list of your bills or list of chores and tasks, but a list of things that just aren't going right. All right. Of course, we may not want to admit to such lists because we are supposed to be superhuman. You know, superhuman. You're supposed to be one of those it could be worse kind of people. Yes. How would you make such lists? I mean, after all, somebody has it worse than you. Amen. You're supposed to be one of those everything happens for a reason kind of people. How dare you feel anything? And if you're a man, you're not even supposed to cry. You know what they say, men cry in the dark. Don't you dare make such a list. Come on, Doc. You're supposed to subscribe to the Indian proverb that says, I had no shoes and complained until I met a man who had no feet. You've got feet. Why are you complaining? But honestly, if we can't be real in God's house, that's right. Where can we be real? If you can't lament and cry out to God, even in the house of the Lord, where can you be human? That's right. Honestly, the mountains and stumbling blocks of life can bring us to our knees. That's right. Yes. So much so that we may fall to our knees and we cry out like our ancestors, like the old saints. They cried out because of the mountains and the stumbling blocks. Lord, don't move the mountain, but give me the strength to climb. Lord, don't take away the stumbling block. What did they say? But lead me all around. Life can be hard. Yes. Yes. Sometimes fall falling to our knees. But we won't focus on your list today because, you know, it's really not about you. It's really not about me. Habakkuk had a list. He had a list of things conveying that, hey, if it ain't one thing, it's another. Habakkuk, his name means to embrace. His name means wrestler. So Habakkuk had to wrestle with the fact that he believed in God. On the one hand, that's the fact, God is able. But on the other hand, it's trouble. I turn around and there's trouble. I look down and there's trouble. I look around and there's trouble. He's wrestling with the facts of his situation. His list was factual. He wasn't exaggerating. You see, sometimes people say, oh, just get over it. It's not that bad. It may not be that bad to you. But the fact of the matter is, I believe in the ableness of God. Yet I see trouble. Habakkuk notes 6 things that weren't right. Come on. Habakkuk says, look, the fig tree does not bud. That's a fact. There are no grapes on the vines. That's a fact. The olive crop fails. That's a fact. The fields produce no food. That's a fact. There are no sheep in the pen and no cattle in the stalls. 6 things that he could list. Thing about the enemy is that the enemy wants our minds to be fixed on the facts attached to problems more than remembering the facts attached to God. It does not mean there aren't problems. Yes. But God, in spite of the seen facts, God has the ability to deal with the unseen. Yes. God can change situations instantaneously. We serve an instantaneous God. At any moment, the situation can change. Habakkuk, he did not physically see change, but that did not mean that God wasn't up to something. People always talking about the busyness of the devil. That's right. What about the busyness of God? The fig tree doesn't bud right now, but a bud is on the way. The grapes, there are no vines, but keep on looking at the vine. The olive crop fails, but God specializes in triumph. The fields produce no food today, but keep on living so that you can see tomorrow. You don't know what God has in store. There are no sheep in the pens, there's no cattle in the stall, but God specializes. He's the keeper of pens and he's the keeper of stalls. Yes, right. Yes. Be satisfied with the God of the situation, because God is always changing situations, manipulating things on our behalf. Be satisfied in God and watch. When we are satisfied in God, God is most glorified in us. Things are messed up, but I'm so satisfied in my Savior. Things aren't always going right, but I'm so satisfied in my Savior. Why? Because he means more to me than anything that this world could ever offer. Somebody said, I don't have to worry about the things ahead. All I have to do is live right and believe in what he said. Why? Because I can call him in the morning, I can call him in the middle of the night, and when I call him, he'll make everything all right. Why? Because Jesus promised that he'd take care of me. Standing on the promises of God. What else are you going to stand on anyway? That's right. All other ground is sinking sand. So the facts tell me that God is still able. I may have trouble in one hand, but I put my life in God's hand. And that's what makes the difference. Yes, Habakkuk's situation, it was factual that things weren't going right, and that can be very disturbing when thinking about the fact that life has things going on all the time. If it ain't one thing, it's another. If it ain't one thing, it's another. That's the fact. It can be disturbing thinking about it. The human experience, it does include pain. You know, sometimes you can't sleep at night. Sometimes you lose your appetite. Sometimes there's no one that seems to understand what you're dealing with. Sometimes you lose your sense of hope and your sense of security. That is disturbing. In his book, Dr. James Cone, he wrote a book entitled The Cross and the Lynching Tree. And in that book, he talks about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And he talks about how King, once he realized and he took that place to be the most visible leader in the civil rights movement, King realized that, whew, this is quite a chore. And when he thought about what he really stepped into, it disturbed Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. You see great leaders and you don't always know that they're disturbed. One day in particular, on January 27th, 1956, in the early weeks of the Montgomery bus boycott, King received a midnight telephone call. It was a threat to blow up his house if he didn't leave in 3 days. This disturbed King because he thought about his wife and he thought about his newly born little baby girl. This made him so concerned that fear drove him from his bed to his kitchen. Down on his knees, King cried out, "Lord, I'm down here trying to do what's right. Yes. But Lord, I must confess that I'm weak right now. That's right. I'm faulting right now. I'm losing my courage." Dr. James Cone writes about it, and he says that Dr. King is reported as having said that God said, "Martin, stand up for righteousness. That's right. Martin, stand up for justice. Martin, stand up for truth, and I will be with you even to the end of the world." Yes. God's going to take care of you is the promise that Dr. King remembered. And because he remembered it, he did what he was supposed to, even unto the end, because he had a God who was there with him, even until the end. God's going to take care of you, King. When King was at his darkest moment, at the midnight of death that was at his door, he turned to the God of the cross. In 2018, we have our own disturbances. Yes. But what we need to do is turn to the God of the cross. Yes. No matter how many disturbing times we face, we have to turn to the God of the cross. Why? Because God will take care of us. No matter what we face, our posture must be undisturbed, but God is the supreme being over all. I'm disturbed, but God is the truth. I'm disturbed, but God is an ultimate planner. I'm disturbed, but God is the revealer of the future. I'm disturbed, but justice and mercy will always reign because God is still the Lord of Lords. I may be disturbed, but I serve such a mighty God, and no disturbance is greater than the presence of God. I learned that when I was working back in 2018. I was working at a bank as a teller. One of the worst jobs I ever had in my life. I was working as a bank teller, and I had just preached a message the Sunday before. I went to work that week. The message was being aware of the presence of God. All right. Well, you know, you preach and you live this thing, and then God shows you whether or not you believe what you preach. So I went to work that week. I just preached. Being aware of the presence of God. Yes. And then someone robbed the bank that week. Oh, yes. Right there in the beautiful Charlotte, North Carolina. I was behind the counter, and it was interesting because when the gentleman walked in, I knew that he was going to rob that bank. The only way I can tell you that I knew was because I was aware of the presence of God. He walked into the bank, and just as clear as day, I could hear it, "McCoy, you're about to get robbed." So I sat there ever so calm. He walked in and slid me a note. It said, "Give me all the money." Yes, just like on television. And so I started to give him all the money. But as this was going on, my coworker was working at the window. She was there. Her back was turned. My supervisor was on lunch break. So it was just McCoy right there. He came in, and all of a sudden, everything that I had been taught kicked in. And when he walked out, I walked behind him, locked the door, came back. Then I triggered the alarm. My coworker turned around. She said, "What are you doing?" I said, "We've just been robbed." She goes crazy. Ah! But I was aware of the presence of God. You You see, chaos can be going on all around you. You know that sometimes people don't act right. You know that sometimes you don't feel right. You know that sometimes you have to deal with things, and before you deal with them, you better make sure God deals with you, or you're going to mess some things up. Let God direct your steps. Let God direct your mouth. Let God direct your actions, and God will get the glory out of your life.
That's right. That's right.
So, may be disturbed, but no disturbance is greater than the presence of God.
That's right.
Habakkuk's list, it was factual. His list was disturbing, but you know, his list also was out of his control. Sometimes we can do some things about some things, but then other times, Habakkuk, how are you going to make a crop grow?
That's right.
Habakkuk, how are you going to put grapes on the vine?
That's right.
Habakkuk, how are you going to get the sheep back and the cattle back? Oh, it's out of his control.
Yes.
But I like the fact that he didn't try to take control of the situation. Habakkuk chose to be joyful in God, his Savior. Sometimes humanity wants to take matters in their own hands instead of being joyful in the Savior. We can be joyful in everything but the Savior.
That's right. Amen. My Lord.
But he doesn't attempt to help himself. He more so focuses on the God who sustains him. He wasn't into this whole idea of self-help. I was in the bookstore not long ago. Do you realize that one of the largest sections in the bookstore is the self-help section? Amen. Human beings are so occupied with helping themselves.
That's right.
And then when it's no longer or not in their control, they don't always know what to do. The largest section, one of the largest sections in the bookstore is the self-help section.
That's right.
But when trouble comes, bad trouble, big bad trouble,
That's right.
we need a big bad God.
Yes.
Because trouble is coming. Jesus said that he's overcome the world, but he says in this life, John 16, in this life there will be tribulation. That is also a promise. If Jesus said it, I believe it. In this life there will be tribulation. There will be trouble. He says, be of good cheer. I have overcome the world. But you're going to have to carry your cross.
That's right. Yes.
And when you carry that cross, there are going to be things out of your control. You don't need a bookstore with a large self-help section. You need to be reminded of what the psalmist says. The psalmist does not say that I go to a bookstore and I look for a self-help book. No, the psalmist says I will lift my eyes unto the hills from which cometh my help. My help comes from the Lord. My help comes from the Lord. He made heaven and earth. He won't suffer my foot to be moved. He'll keep me and he won't slumber. The Lord is my keeper. The Lord is my shade. You have to know who God is even before you get in trouble.
That's right.
God isn't on vacation for the summer.
That's right.
God is not in a jacuzzi in Jamaica. God is busy. Always on the job. God is not asleep.
That's right.
God hasn't taken some type of an Ambien. God is on the job. God is not on sabbatical.
That's right.
God is still in control. God is busy, always up to something. It may be out of our control, but God is in control. Still has the whole world in his hands. Remember that little song that they taught you when you were a child? He's got the whole world in his hands. That doesn't change because your age changes.
That's right.
He's still in control. That's why I like Habakkuk, how he didn't forget to use the word though. Though. And we know that in the other translation it says although.
That's right.
Anyway, I like it. Though.
That's right.
You see, though means despite the fact. Though means however. Though indicates that a factor imposes restrictions on what was previously said. Though I see this, and though I see that, I will rejoice in the Lord. I will be joyful in God, my Savior. No matter what I face, I rejoice. God reigns over all, so I rejoice. When God is present, it's always a controlled situation, so I rejoice. How do I know Because all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are called according to his purpose. All things work together for good. Finances work together for good. Health works together for good. Relationships work together for good. Job works together for good. School works together for good. My health works together for good. My household works together for good. Family works together for good. All means all things work together for my good.
That's good.
So I understand that there is this saying,
All right.
if it ain't one thing,
Come on.
it's another.
It's enough.
According to the Cambridge Dictionary, this saying is used when bad things keep happening to a person.
That's right.
But I tell you, Calvary,
Preach.
on today, I want to reclaim this saying
All right.
for God's sake.
That's right.
God has been too good to us for us to attach ourselves to the negative connotation
That's right.
of this phrase. If it ain't one thing, it's another. So then on today,
All right.
I declare July 29th, 2018, that when it comes to the blessings of God, if he ain't doing one thing, then he's sure enough doing another. You see, he woke me up this morning. That's one thing. He started me on my way. That's another. He put food on my table. That's one thing. He put clothes on my back. That's another. He gave me the activity of my limbs. That's one thing. And he gave me a reasonable portion of health. That's another. He kept me from all hurt, harm, and danger. That's one thing. He kept me in my right mind. That's another. He built the foundations for the earth. That's one thing. And he made a home in the sky for the sun. Oh, that's another one. I mean, think about what God does. He created the moon to tell us the seasons. That's one thing. He sends rain from his home above. That's another. He uplifts the brokenhearted. That's one. And he liberates the oppressed. That's another. So I reclaim this saying on today, because if God ain't done one thing for you, I'm sure he's done another. And so we need to rejoice in the Lord, because even when you feel sick, even when you feel like you lost strength, God is still busy. And God loves us so much. We're so blessed that we can reign with God forever in eternity. Why? Because of the work of the cross. Oh, they did so much to Jesus. Jesus, he bled and he suffered before he died. You see, he saved the world from sin. He saved humanity from sins. Well, how did he do it, McCoy? Where they put a nail in the one hand. That's one thing. And then they put a nail in the other. That's another. They put nails in his feet. That's one thing. They put a crown of thorns on his head. That's another. They pierced him in his side. That's one thing. And they spat on him. That's another. They mocked Jesus. That's one thing. And they said he wasn't the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. That's another. And so I thank God that God is always up to something. If he ain't doing one thing, he's showing up doing another. I said, if he ain't doing one thing, he's showing up doing another. The Lord is blessing us right now. You came in here blessed. You're going to leave here blessed. You're going to serve the Lord blessed. The people who meet you will call you blessed. When they see you coming, they're going to say blessed. Because they realize that God is doing some marvelous things. Fret not thyself because of evildoers. Don't get too upset, because God is always working on your behalf. I like to think about it like this. When I think about the fact that I have no strength in myself, sometimes when I'm driving in my car, I have to remind myself of what God is doing. When I'm driving in my car, I have to remind myself that sometimes it's only when I am admittedly weak that I can see the strength of God. And so my testimony is, I don't know what I do without the Lord. That's my testimony. I don't know what I do without